Hello everyone, welcome back to day 9 of our Python Masterclass. So far, we have learned Python fundamentals like variables, loops, functions, list, tuple, dictionary, set, file handling, exception handling, modules, packages, and also regular expression. So today, we are starting one of the most important topics in Python and software development, that is object oriented programming, which is also known as OOPS. Almost every large applications you see today, such as Instagram, WhatsApp, Amazon, or banking software, that uses OOPS. So in this class, we'll understand the basic building blocks of OOPS, including classes, objects, and the self keyword, constructors, and methods. So don't worry if all these terms sound new. By the end of this session, we will become much clearer. So, first, what is object oriented programming? So, before learning object oriented programming, let's understand why it was introduced. Imagine you are building a very small Python program, writing everything in one file works fine. But what if you're building software with thousands of lines of code? Managing managing all this will become difficult. So that's where object oriented programming helps. So object oriented programming, it's a programming style where we organize our code into objects that contain both data and the functions that work on the data. So instead of thinking only about the functions, we think about real world objects like students, cars, bank accounts, or mobile phones. So this makes programs easier to organize, understand, and maintain. So some of the major advantages of OOPS are better code organization, code reusability, easier maintenance, and better scalability for large projects. So, what are the real world examples of OOPS? The easiest way to understand OOPS is through the real world examples. Let's take a car. A car has properties such as color, brand, model, and speed. And it also has behaviors such as starting, stopping, accelerating, and braking. Similarly, a student has properties like name, roll number, marks, and behaviors like studying, writing exam, and attending classes and all. So every object in the real world has some characteristics and some actions. So OOPS help us represent these real world objects inside our programs. So what is a class? A class is simply a blueprint or a template. Think about building a house. Before constructing the house, an architect first he creates a blueprint. So the blueprint describes how the house should look, but it's not the actual house. Similarly, a class defines what an object should have, but it does not create the object itself. So it only acts as a design. So, what is an object? If a class is the blueprint, then an object is the actual thing created from the blueprint. For example, blueprint for a car, it can be used to manufacture thousands of cars. So the blueprint is the class. Each individual car, it's an object. So similarly, if we create a student class, every student we create becomes a separate object, and each object has its own data, but follows the same blueprint. So that's what an object. Now, creating a class. How to create a class? Creating a class in Python is very simple. We use the class keyword followed by the class name, and by convention, class name starts with a capital letter such as student capital S, car capital C, or an employee capital E. Inside of the class, we define the data and the functions that belong to the class. We will see the exact syntax in VS Code, but for now, just remember that a class is where we describe our project or objects, uh, like color and yeah, all the characters that our object has. Sorry. Then comes to creating objects. So after creating a class, the next step is creating our objects. Now you can think of a class as a cookie cutter. Every cookie made using that cutter has the same shape, but it can have different decorations, right? Similarly, one class can create many different objects. For example, one student class can create a Rahul, Priya, and Aman as separate student objects, and each object stores its own information independently. Now, what is the self keyword? Now let's discuss something that confuses almost every beginner, that is the self keyword. The good news is that it's much simpler than it looks. The self keyword refers to the current object. Imagine you have two student objects. One object accesses its own data. Python uses self uh, like to understand which object's data is being used. So if you have two student objects, when one object accesses its own data, the Python will use self to understand which object is being used. Like you can think that self as meaning of this object, like this object. Whenever we create methods inside a class, we'll almost always see self as the first parameter. Like we will check this while doing our practice questions. So next comes our constructors. Sometimes whenever we create an object, we want to initialize it with some data immediately. For example, when creating a student object, we might want to provide the student's name and roll number right away instead of assigning these values later. Python provides a special method called the constructor, and the constructor that is written in this form: the underscore underscore init and underscore underscore. This is how the constructor is written, and the important thing to remember is that Python automatically calls this method whenever a new object is created. Okay, so this saves the time and keeps our code organized. So the purpose is that it's a special method that initializes the new object. That's it, nothing more uh, than this. You just need to remember that it's a special method that initializes every new object. That's it. And next, finally, let's understand two important terms, that is instance variables uh, and instance methods. First, instance variables are the data that belong to each object. For example, every student object has its own name, age, marks. So these values are different for every object. And the instant methods are the functions that work with the object's data. For example, a student object might have a method to display the details or to calculate grades. So together, instant variables and the methods, they form the core of every object in the object oriented programming. I guess you understood what this variables and methods means. These are just the variables attributes unique to each object, and here functions that operate on object data. We You might not understand now, but while doing our practice questions, you will get a clear vision of all these things. Now we have learned the theory behind these classes, objects, constructors, and the self keyword. Now we'll switch to VS Code and we'll build these concepts from scratch by creating our own classes and objects. Now, one of the biggest advantages of the classes is that we can create multiple objects from a single class. Now, let's take the example of a student class. Instead of writing separate code for Rahul, Priya, and Aman, we can just create one student class, then take three different student objects. Although all these objects are created from the same class, each one stores its own data. For example, everyone have their different marks, so that's why this avoids code duplication and it makes our programs much easier to manage. And object interaction. Objects are not just used to store the data, they can also perform actions. Suppose we have a bank account object. Instead of manually changing the account balance, we can create methods like deposit and withdraw. Whenever we call these methods, the object's data is updated. And this is the main idea of the OOPS. We don't directly change the data, instead, we ask the object to perform an action. And this makes our program safer and better organized. So, we will see all these in our practice session. Now is just the theory part. Now we'll see class versus the object. Students often get confused between a class and an object. Here's an easy way to remember this is that a class it's a blueprint or the design, and the object that's the actual thing created from that blueprint. Now think of a mobile phone company. The company first designs one mobile phone model. Then thousands of actual phones are manufactured using that single design. And that design it's the class, and each phone it's an object. And so and one more important thing to remember is that one class can create many objects. And one more is this constructor versus the normal method. So okay, there's no data here, but yeah, a constructor that's a special method. It runs automatically whenever an object is created. Its main job is to initialize the object's data. And a normal method, however, only runs only when we call it explicitly. For example, a constructor might automatically store the student's name when the object is created, but this normal method might display the student's details only when we ask it to. So the key difference is that the constructors they run automatically, but this normal methods run only when we call them. So that is the main difference. So what are the advantages of this OOPS? Why do companies prefer this object-oriented programming? These are the main advantages. First, it improves the code reusability. Instead of writing the same code again and again, we simply create new objects. So the second is it keeps the code well organized, and the third is it becomes much easier to maintain large software projects. And finally, OOPS models real world objects naturally, making programs easier and understandable. So that's why almost every modern software application they use this object oriented programming. And there are many real world applications also. uh, like here there's a hospital management system, banking systems, and online shopping websites. They use games use objects for players, enemies, vehicles, weapons. And online shopping use objects like products, customers, and orders. And even in the hospital, patient, doctor. So once you understand this OOPS concept, then you'll definitely start seeing the objects everywhere around you. And there are some common beginner mistakes. We discuss this in our every class. Here in OOPS, one mistake is forgetting to write self inside the methods. Another is the misspelling of init. Remember, it has two underscores before and after init. And then some students they also forget to create an object before calling that method. And indentation mistakes are very common because the Python uses indentation to define a code block. It's very important in Python. And yeah, these are some common mistakes, but yeah, don't worry. If you make these mistakes at first, it's fine. They are part of our learning process. We'll practice and we will avoid them naturally. And right now, I know everything is really confusing. We will do some problems. We will do some practical problems. Hence, we will understand how to uh, write and how to write create classes, how to call, and what are the objects and all. We'll understand. Okay, we will see this thing. What is OOP workflow? So let's summarize how OOPS works. First, we identify a real world problem. Then we will create a class that acts as a blueprint. And then we will create objects from that class, and each object has its own attributes which stores the data. Now, each object has their own methods which define their actions. So, finally, we use these objects in our program to solve our problems. So, this simple workflow is followed in almost every object oriented applications. So, this is really important. Then, okay, we will now solve some problems in VS Code. So here we will create a separate file for we'll start solving our questions. So our first question is, you have to create a class named student and create one object of it. We have to write capital here S, and then okay, we will just, they didn't mention to write any content, so just write pass in there, and then student1, and here print student1. So run the code. There's nothing there. We'll write print hello. See hello there, and main student object at they have given some address here. Okay, that's not the matter now. See here, the student one you're seeing here. So this is creating an object, the student one. This is how we create class and class name. This is how we create an object. Here we created object as student1, and here we have given our class. So this is how we create object, and we printed that. Now next question, create a method inside a class. We have to create a method inside our class. So to create a method inside a class, we'll take a class that says student, and then here function, and we will print something, and then we will create our object, and then student1 dot display. Okay, we will comment this out and see here. Now we have added our first method inside the class. Notice that every method inside a class takes self as its first parameter here. Now after creating the object, okay, this self, okay, this is every method inside a class that takes this self as its first parameter, and this self means like the current object. The self refers to the current object, and after creating that object, we call the method using this dot notation, that is student1, that's the object dot, this notation we will use to call the method. So whenever we call this method, it prints welcome to Python oops. So this shows that object can perform actions through the methods. So this is calling method. Now we'll see one more question. How to create multiple objects. Now we'll take a class as car, and here a method like this, and then we'll print this is a car something, and then We'll make multiple objects now. See, this is our first object. Now we'll make multiple objects here, card 2 and card 3, and we will display here 2 and here 3. We'll run the code and check. See, you can use multiple objects also. So one class can create multiple objects. We created 3 different car objects here for the same car class. So even though the objects are different, they all use the same display method. This demonstrates one of the biggest advantages of the OOPS, that is code reusability. We don't need to write code again and again. We can just use we can just use this above code and we can print this. So this is example of code reusability. So this is the advantage of OOPS. So using instance variables. So what are these instance variables? We have studied a theory part, but yeah, that's very confusing. Now I'll write a code and then I'll explain it. Through that way you will definitely understand what does this instance variables means. That's init, right? Okay. This. Then self name is a name, and then self age is age, and then we'll create an object student1 of the class, and we will pass our arguments here as we have parameters there, and then we will print our student name, and we will also print our student age. Okay, so here now we are using a constructor. Here this underscore init and again underscore, this method it runs automatically whenever an object is created. It receives the value Rahul and also 20, then stores them in the object's instance variables using the self.name and self.age. So here every object can have different values, making each object unique. So here we have taken 2 parameters, that is name and age, and that's why we have given 2 arguments here, the Rahul and 20. So it receives these 2 this data. So this self, you have to use this self here. So these are called as the instance variables, like self name and self age. Instance variables belongs to only this. So every object can have different values, that makes each object unique. Now okay, we'll move to our next question, which is display the student details. But okay, we have to take the input in one method and then we have to display it in another. Now we'll move on to our next question, that says display our student details. For this, now first we have to take the information, then we'll use another method to print them. I'll take class and then student. take this constructor. We have to use self, we have to use name, and will use age. That's it. We'll display only these things of a student: name and age. Then we will print using another method which says display and just self. Then we will print name. Here we already declared self name, so we will use that, and again print age. We will use this self age here, and then we'll create a student and we'll give these two like name and age. Will pass to this class, and then through this object we will display our result using this method. So we will run the code. So here you can see the name and age. So in this way, here first instead of printing the values outside the class, we have created another method that is called display. So this method accesses the object's own data using the self. So whenever we call display, the object prints its details. So this keeps related data and behavior together, which is the core idea of this OOPS concept. Okay. So next question. Yeah, we can solve many questions using this concept only. And first we will take the data here, and then we can print area of any rectangle, square, circle, or we can also write any information about any person here. And also we can take information here, and we can provide we can print here, and later we can use the object and we can print the output. Now we'll print using multiple objects. Like we'll take a class, and then we'll self, we'll take name and take marks, and then we will take name here as name, and we'll take we don't need comma, we'll marks as marks, and then one more method to display our results, that is self, and we will use these. Okay, we'll write this way here. We'll write self name and comma, and we'll write self marks. Like self name has these many marks. Then we will create multiple objects using only a single class. And how to do that? Rahul 85 marks, and then we will create multiple objects here. We'll take student 2, student 3. Here we'll change the name to Priya. Here we'll change the name to Aman, and we'll write here 95, and here we'll write as 75. And now using these three objects, we will display our result. Using student 1, 2 and 3, we will display our result. See, in this way we can give multiple objects and multiple data for the same class. So in this way we can reuse our code which is already written. So that's why oops is the best concept to use. So a single class can represent many real world objects which contains different data like this. And yeah, that's it. We have created classes, we have created objects, and have to give data, how to print them, multiple objects and all. Now we will move back to our oops concepts again. So before we finish, let's quickly revise today's concepts that we have learned about object oriented programming and why oops is useful, what classes are, how to create, what objects are, how to create, and the purpose of the self keyword, and that constructors, that is underscore, double underscore and double underscore, and what are instance variables and what are instance methods. Using that self, we have seen all of them in our practice questions also. So yeah, there are more practice questions, you can complete these. And now so yeah, these are these are the questions, the same questions, these are like the same questions that we have already practiced. So yeah, congratulations. Today you have taken your first step into this object oriented programming. We did all basic questions. You can move to advanced slowly, but yeah, this is beginner friendly, so you'll just get basic knowledge about all the concepts. So now you know classes, objects, constructors, methods, and the self keyword. So practice today's coding questions, because oops that becomes much easier when you build your own classes and write your own examples, solve your own questions. So in the next video we will explore the four main pillars of this oops concepts, and see and we'll see how they'll make software more powerful and more reusable. We will learn about polymorphism, inheritance, encapsulation, and abstraction. And we will also do some coding questions, and we will also do some coding questions related to all these topics overall at the end of the session. So if you like this video, you can like, subscribe to my channel, and we will meet in our next video, the second part of this oops concept. Till then, happy coding.